And today we are continuing our series for August, where we are looking at the roots of unity and studying some of our basic teachings. And we do this in August because this month is the birthday of both of our co-founders, Myrtle and Charles Fillmore, 1845 and 1854. So today we're going to focus on unity's approach to the Bible. It's one of the questions that I get a lot when somebody new to unity comes up to me. They always ask, well, what does unity say about the Bible? And my short answer is, well, we're all in favor of it. Which usually leads to another question, something like, well, do you believe that the Bible is the literal Word of God? And the short answer to that is no. And at that point, they either leave in a huff, or as Groucho Marx would say, if you can't leave in a huff, leave in a minute and a huff, or they ask another question. They ask, well, then, if they stick around, then they ask, well, just what exactly do you teach and believe about the Bible? And the slightly longer answer to that question can be found in this little pamphlet that you can find in the seat back, in the pocket of the seat back right in front of you. This is our publication, Unity, A Path for Spiritual Living. And on the second page here, right up at the top, we have our statement on what it is that we teach about the Bible. We'll put it up here on the screen. Unity co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore studied the Bible as history and allegory and interpreted it as a metaphysical, that is, symbolic representation of humankind's evolutionary journey toward spiritual awakening. In addition, Unity recognizes that the Bible is a complex collection of writings compiled over many centuries. We honor the writings as reflecting the understanding and inspiration of the writers at the time they were written. The Bible continues to be a valuable spiritual resource for us. The only thing I changed up there in that definition is the word metaphysical. The reason I said symbolic is because the word metaphysical doesn't mean the same thing today as it meant back when the Fillmores were talking about that. If you look at our popular culture today, walk into any bookstore. Are there bookstores still around? Do they exist? There's a few, I guess. But walk into a bookstore and go over to the section that says metaphysical on it, okay? Take a look at the kind of books you find there. What you find in the metaphysical section are books on UFOs, astrology, and crystals and things like that. That's not what we're talking about here. So I prefer to use the word symbolic, our symbolic interpretation of the Bible. So history, reality, allegory, reality, myth, all of those things. Good stuff. But the Bible can be a really tough sell for some folks in Unity because, it was used to abuse people. It was used to justify things like genocide, slavery, discrimination. People used the Bible to send people on a guilt trip. And you know what they say about guilt? It's the gift that keeps on giving. It's self-perpetuating. And as a result of that guilt trip, a lot of people in Unity are and continue to be, shall we say, allergic to the Bible. So let me ask, how many of you grew up in a household where there was at least one Bible on the premises, even if you just use it to record births and weddings and things like that? The majority of the people here had that exposure. And even if you never had a Bible in the house in our culture, even if you never looked at a Bible, in the United States, you can't get away from the content. Even if you never picked up a Bible in your entire life, if you live in this country for any amount of time, you know who Jesus was. You know what happened on Christmas and Easter. You know who Adam and Eve and Moses were. You have at least a concept of the Ten Commandments. It's all around us. Our culture is immersed in this. And it's pretty amazing how the Bible is embedded in our culture. Now, when it comes to the Bible, people tend to fall into one of three groups. Some folks believe that every single word and story and event that's depicted in the Bible came from the mouth of God. It's literally, factually, historically true, in every detail. Sometimes we call them Bible literalists, call them Bible fundamentalists. Another name you hear used are Bible thumpers. And that's literally because preachers would take the Bible, if they were making a point, they would hold it up in the air like this, and they would emphasize by doing that. It's something that happened. Now, another group number 2, they look at the Bible as a complete waste of time. It depicts God as approving of war crimes and genocide and all of the other things I was talking about before, slavery, discrimination, and all of those things. They just soon trash the whole thing. They mock it, they belittle it. We might call them Bible bashers. I was in that camp at one time. I got to the point where I thought, these stories, a lot of the stuff you read in the Old Testament is just so horrible. Why on earth would I want to look at this as a guideline or a roadmap for my life? And of course, the whole problem with that was that I was looking at it through the wrong lens. I wasn't in unity yet. So you have Bible thumpers over here, Bible bashers over here, right? Those are the extremes. And what do you have in between? You've got this huge middle ground. There's a lot of territory in between, which is what I call the land of progress. It's the land of reason. It's the place where we grow and evolve. So when we get away from the extremes, that's where the real work, and I call it work because we have to work at it, we have to study it. It's the real work of reconciliation, integration, and progress. We work to understand the extremes, and then we move beyond both of them. So the Bible is neither infallible, nor is it irrelevant. It's not the absolute truth, but it can be a very useful and effective tool to help us discover the truth for ourselves. I'm a DIY kind of guy, do-it-yourself kind of guy, and I'm sure some of you out there are like that, right? You like to tackle something first, and even if you screw it up and have to call the geek squad or the electrician or the plumber in to bail you out, still there's that satisfaction about getting to take a crack at things first. Well, unity is all about do-it-yourself, especially when it comes to the Bible. Nobody gets to tell you what it means. Sure, there are plenty of scholars with lots of great ideas that we use and we look to, and we get to decide what makes sense to us based on our own background and based on the current level of our experience, because every one of us has a little different background and our level of experience is a little bit different. At the most basic level, unity says that the Bible is a written record of the evolution of human consciousness. And if you're a human being, it's not a very big if, is it? If you're a human being, that means it is the record of the evolution of your consciousness, of our consciousness. This isn't an abstraction here. And there's really only one problem with this particular record. It stops 1,878 years ago. It's an unfinished book, as far as I'm concerned, and one of our instructors when we were in seminary agrees with us. Reverend Don Jennings told us that the worst thing they ever did to the Bible was they put a back cover on it. They put a back cover on it. I mean, do you think that people have continued to evolve since that time? Haven't people continued to evolve since that time? Well, there might be a few exceptions. I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. Unfortunately, most of us have continued to evolve, except for maybe these folks from the Westboro Baptist Church or the spelling impaired guy or the Taliban. They all seem to take a lot of pride in the fact that they're moving backwards instead of forwards. But for the most part, the world, including us, seems to have moved on. We've learned a lot since the last book in the Bible was written, and none of us, and none of that that's been written has found its way into the Bible. It's not there yet. Think about it. Slavery's been outlawed. Gender bias, discrimination based on sexual orientation, those things are on their way out. Most countries are reaching levels of equality and justice that were unheard of even 50 years ago, much less 1,700 and some odd years ago. We evolve. The Bible hasn't captured that. We evolve. It happens to us as individuals. It happens to us collectively as a culture. And what psychologists and sociologists are finding is that we go through these very distinct stages of development and evolution, physically and in consciousness. We see some very distinct types of behavior and different characteristics. So you might be asking yourselves at this point, well, Reverend Mark, just exactly how do we see our collective and individual development symbolized by the Bible? Well, here's one example. Okay, for every single one of us, life starts in the womb. We can see this very clearly in the Bible. Think about the story of Adam and Eve for a few seconds. Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. They're in the perfect womb. They're safe. They're protected. All of their needs are provided for to the point where they don't have to work. They don't need clothing. They are blissfully naive and totally unaware of what life outside the garden is like and what life outside the garden might have in store for them. But they want to know. They want to know. They have a desire for knowledge of good and evil. Can't know good without having the experience of the not so good. That's how the whole thing starts. They want to know. They have to know because life in the garden is only a partial life. It's not the full potential of life. Life in the womb is only part of life. It's not the full potential of life. To be fully awake and fully conscious means we have to be born. We have to leave the garden. Whatever that might look like for us, and it's not always pleasant. Think about it. What's the first thing that babies do when they come into the world after delivery? For the most part, they cry, right? Hey, this is no fun. Where's my warm, dark spot where everything's provided for me? I didn't sign up for this. They cry. And then, once the shock is over, eventually they smile. They learn how to laugh. They roll over. They sit up. They walk, talk, and go about their business of finding out about all the differences between good and evil and all the things in the world around them. They start waking up. They start becoming more fully consciousness. So, we can choose to look at the Garden of Eden story a couple of ways. When Adam and Eve leave the garden, there are some people out there who choose to look at that as punishment. They're being punished for disobedience, which is the place where the guilt trip begins. And you all know what I think about guilt trips. The other way we can look at it is to choose to see it as a symbolic description of a very necessary part of becoming more fully human, awake, and conscious. The first step on the road to awakening. Which version is more life-affirming for you? You get to choose. You get to decide. Okay, so after birth, there are other very distinct stages of human development. Let's think of some of the attributes of a toddler. Okay, they're cute, of course. But isn't there also something called the terrible twos? And the age of no. And children, they have vivid imaginations. They have a rich fantasy life, complete with imaginary friends and talking animals and magic. Do you think there's some magic in talking animals in the Bible? Check out the book of Exodus sometime if you want to see the toddler stage of development in full flower. Moses has a magic duel with Pharaoh. There are plagues and avenging angels. And then Moses leads the Israelites out into the desert, and they're just like a bunch of children on a long car trip. Are we there yet? You know, like this child right here. They say, no! I don't want to go to the promised land and you can't make us. That's what's going on throughout the entire, out in the wilderness, they're complaining, they're digging in their heels. They don't want to go, they want to go back into Egypt where their games and toys and TVs are, you know, that kind of thing. It's that kind of a thing that's happening. After childhood, we have adolescence. We have the age of raging hormones, of wild and rebellious behavior, unruly, self-centered. There are good things too, but sometimes this is the stuff that gets all the attention. Self-centered, egotistical. Plenty of examples of that in the Bible. Look in the books of Joshua or Judges and other places where you'll see that kind of behavior going on. And at times, people don't grow up. Adolescence spills over into adulthood. The ego runs amok with disastrous results, which we can see in the stories of the kings. Saul, David, Solomon, and others who used their kingly authority to oppress others and to increase their own wealth and power. And then eventually we get to see some healthy adult consciousness beginning to come through. We see creativity, we see scholarship starting to emerge, we see literature, we see philosophy, the beautiful Song of Solomon, we have the book of Ruth, we have Job, we have Ecclesiastes, and we have the passionate pleas for justice and equality from Micah and Amos. But those things were kind of short-lived. Something that often happens in human life and human development is that progress and change is considered to be dangerous. Some people react to progress and change with fear. And when we give in to fear, the temptation is to try to turn around and go backwards. Back into slavery in Egypt or whatever it happened to be, backwards in consciousness. Now in the Bible, we get to see this kind of reactionary trend happening. There was this whole time when all of a sudden it became all about rigid adherence to religious ideology, dogma, and the law. Think about the book of Leviticus. There was also this drive that we see for racial purity. Jews couldn't marry non-Jews. And if they already had a non-Jewish spouse and children, they were ordered to send them back to wherever it was that they came from. How ironic. So in this reactionary phase, what happens? They stop growing. Culture becomes stagnant. They become easy prey for the Greeks and the Roman Empire. Next thing you know, they're enslaved again, or at least they're occupied. No longer the masters of their own destiny. And then it was at that point in the evolution of their particular consciousness that Jesus comes along. And he tells the people, and if we had to summarize his message, he says, it's time to start growing again. It's time to start evolving again. It's time for the next phase in consciousness, which Jesus referred to as the kingdom of heaven. This was a world of equals, where justice was more important than the law, and the needs of others were just as important as the needs of the individual. Of course, they killed him for that kind of thinking. But they didn't kill the idea, because as we were talking about last week, it's impossible to kill the idea. Once it catches on, there's no stopping it. Mark Twain here once said that a crank is someone with a new idea until it catches on. Then all of a sudden they become a sage or a prophet. Jesus led the world to the brink of a new level of consciousness. And the message is that that's our potential. That's our potential, and it's unlimited. So the Bible really invites us to examine our values and discern where we are in consciousness, both as individuals and especially as a culture. How are we responding to life? Are we like toddlers having a tantrum? Adolescents rebelling and acting out? Egomaniacs trying to satisfy our unending greed and desire? Are we being reactionary in the face of change? trying to go backwards? Or are we following the Christ consciousness? Are we starting to listen to what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature? A higher level of consciousness that opens up the future and embraces uncertainty. We're being invited to look around us and discern where the Christ consciousness is best being expressed today. That's what we need to be looking for, because that's what needs to be added to the Bible for future generations. And the great news here is that in this movement, we get to be a part of that important process, which really gives us a vision and a purpose that I think is worth going after. See you next week.